Ever get that feeling like there's more to things than meets the eye? Like there's something hidden beneath the surface.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Today, we're going deep into the world of Francis Bacon,
Okay.
a man completely obsessed with hidden meanings and
Mhm.
maybe connected to some of history's most secretive groups.
Sounds intriguing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Our source material for this deep dive is Francis Bacon and his secret society.
Okay.
And right off the bat, you'll notice Bacon was incredibly deliberate with his language, almost like he was hiding messages in plain sight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great observation, and it really speaks to the political climate of Bacon's time.
Okay.
Cryptography was absolutely essential back then.
Right.
The book even points out that every prince has his cipher.
Interesting.
So when Bacon himself said he liked to keep some state about his work,
Yeah.
it's worth asking, was this just for mystique, or was there something more at play?
Okay, that's a good point. He wasn't just being cryptic just for the sake of it.
Right.
But the book also mentions that he was a big believer in common sense.
Yes.
How does that fit with all this secrecy?
That's where Bacon's philosophy gets really interesting.
Yeah.
He believed common sense was like a starting point,
Okay.
but true understanding came from experience and reasoning. Think of it like this.
Yeah.
If you'd never seen a chicken hatch, would you automatically know it came from an egg?
I see what you mean. We take things for granted, but true knowledge has to go deeper.
Exactly.
So maybe his secrecy was a way to protect ideas that challenged the common assumptions of his time.
It's a compelling theory, and it's where those potential connections to secret societies come into play.
Okay.
The Rosicrucians, the Freemasons.
Right.
These were groups that thrived on symbolism and hidden meanings. The book even claims some German Rosicrucian initiates referred to their society as Baconian.
Whoa, that's a direct link, but wouldn't that kind of coded language make it harder to spread their ideas about reforming the world, which the book says they all wanted?
It's a paradox, isn't it? On one hand, they're advocating for a universal reformation.
Right.
This idea of using knowledge to improve society. On the other, they're shrouding themselves in secrecy.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder who they were trying to protect and from whom.
This is getting complex, and the book doesn't shy away from the big one, the Shakespeare question.
Right.
You might have heard the theory that Bacon actually wrote Shakespeare's plays.
Yeah, of course.
While your source material touches on this, it's a whole other deep dive. We can save that for another time.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But what's relevant to our current discussion is how the book uses the perceived similarities in writing style to further its argument about Bacon's connections to secret societies.
Okay.
They all seem to have a penchant for metaphors and symbolism.
So it's less about who wrote what and more about this shared language of secrecy.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But before we get too lost in those theories,
Sure.
let's step back and talk about Bacon the man. Who was he? What were his goals? And why should we care about him centuries later?
Bacon was a fascinating figure, a man of grand ambitions who saw knowledge as the key to solving humanity's problems.
Okay.
He wanted to reform the arts and sciences,
Right.
to move away from what he saw as a stagnant system of learning.
So he was frustrated with people just memorizing things without truly understanding them.
Exactly.
Kind of like we were talking about with the chicken and the egg.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wanted to shift the focus to observation, experimentation, critical thinking.
Okay.
He was a visionary who believed in the power of knowledge to bring about positive change.
Wow.
But his path wasn't without its obstacles. He pursued a political career, which ultimately ended in scandal and his fall from grace.
That adds another layer to the secrecy question. Was he hiding his ideas to protect himself politically, or was it more about protecting the knowledge itself?
That's a question worth pondering as we go deeper into his work.
Right.
And it's what makes Bacon such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
He was both brilliant and flawed. A man driven by a desire to improve the world, but also susceptible to the temptations of power.
So he's not just some historical figure in a dusty book.
Right.
His struggles with knowledge power and how to use them responsibly are still relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And those struggles are reflected in his unique writing style,
Okay.
which is anything but straightforward. It's filled with metaphors, similes, illusions,
Right.
a deliberate complexity that can be quite challenging to unravel.
It's almost like he wanted to make people work for that deeper understanding, to push them beyond the surface level.
And that brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the book.
Okay.
The idea that paper marks in old books weren't just random markings, but a form of secret communication used by Bacon and his circle.
Wait, paper marks, like those little symbols you sometimes see in the paper, they're saying those were secret messages.
Yes.
Help me understand this. How could they possibly convey complex ideas through something as simple as a paper mark?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
In Bacon's time, expressing certain ideas openly could be dangerous.
Right.
You know, secret societies flourished,
Mm-hmm.
and they needed ways to communicate without attracting unwanted attention.
So these paper marks were like a secret handshake,
Exact.
a way to signal their affiliation or share ideas without raising eyebrows?
Exactly, but it's not just about signaling.
Okay.
The book argues that these paper marks often contain specific symbols that related to Bacon's philosophy or the aims of those secret societies.
Oh, interesting.
Like pots, for example.
Okay.
They could represent vessels of knowledge,
Mhm.
or the alchemical process of transformation,
Right.
ideas that were central to Bacon's thinking.
So it's like they're embedding their ideas right into the structure of the books themselves.
Precisely.
It's a very subtle form of communication, but also a very powerful one.
And the book provides a whole system for interpreting these symbols.
Okay.
It analyzes the prevalence of things like grapes,
Mm.
which they connect to the fruits of knowledge,
Right.
or shields, which could represent protection or the defense of truth.
Okay, now I'm starting to see how they could convey complex ideas through these seemingly simple markings. It's
Yeah.
like a whole hidden layer of meaning waiting to be deciphered.
And the book doesn't shy away from providing specific interpretations for these symbols, tying them back to Bacon's writings and the goals of those secret societies.
Okay.
It's an intricate puzzle,
Right.
but one that can be pieced together if you know what to look for.
That's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly exciting.
I know.
It makes you wonder how many other secret messages are hidden in plain sight just waiting to be discovered.
It's an intriguing thought,
Yeah.
and it speaks to the power of symbolism and the enduring allure of hidden knowledge.
But before we get too carried away with deciphering paper marks,
Right.
let's come back to Bacon's actual work.
Okay.
The book makes a big deal about his efforts to reform learning in science. How exactly was he trying to change things?
Bacon was deeply critical of the educational system of his time.
Okay.
He felt it focused too much on rote memorization and blind acceptance of authority, rather than encouraging critical thinking and independent investigation.
So he was pushing for a more hands-on, experimental approach to knowledge?
Exactly. He argued that true understanding came from observation, experimentation, and the systematic gathering of data.
Interesting.
In a way, he was laying the groundwork for the scientific method as we know it today.
That's a pretty significant contribution. But if he was so forward-thinking, why was he so wrapped up in secrecy and symbolism?
Yeah.
It seems like those two things would be at odds with each other.
It's an interesting tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, he was a visionary who believed in the power of knowledge to improve society.
Mm-hmm.
On the other, he seemed to be operating within this secretive world of hidden meanings and coded messages.
It's like he was trying to protect something,
Yeah.
but it's not clear what or why.
Right.
Maybe it goes back to the dangers of expressing certain ideas openly in his time.
That's certainly a possibility. Remember, he was also deeply involved in politics,
Oh, right.
which can be a treacherous game.
Yeah, definitely.
It's possible that some of his ideas were considered radical or threatening to the established order.
So the secrecy could have been a form of self-preservation?
Yeah.
A way to avoid persecution or censorship?
It's a plausible explanation,
Right.
but it also raises questions about his motives.
Mm-hmm.
Was he truly committed to sharing his knowledge with the world?
Yeah.
Or was he more interested in accumulating power and influence?
That's a tough one to answer. The book certainly presents him as a complex and contradictory figure. On one hand, he's this brilliant thinker who laid the foundations for modern science.
Right.
On the other, he's caught up in this web of secrecy and maybe even political scheming.
And that's what makes him so fascinating to study.
Yeah.
He wasn't a simple hero or villain.
Right.
He was a human being with flaws and contradictions,
Mm.
driven by ambition, but also by a genuine desire to understand the world and improve it.
He sounds a lot like people we know today, actually.
Yeah.
The drive to make a difference, but also the temptation to take shortcuts or play by different rules to achieve your goals.
It's a timeless human dilemma, isn't it?
Mm.
And it's one that Bacon seems to have grappled with throughout his life.
Mm.
His story is a cautionary tale about the allure and the potential pitfalls of knowledge and power.
That makes me think about all the conflicting opinions about Bacon that the book mentions.
Right.
Some people saw him as a visionary genius,
Yeah.
others as a corrupt and self-serving politician.
It's important to remember that history is rarely black and white.
Right.
People are complex and their motives are often mixed.
Yeah.
We shouldn't try to sanitize the past or force historical figures into neat categories.
So how do we make sense of someone like Bacon who seems to embody both the best and the worst of human nature?
I think the key is to avoid simplistic judgments.
Okay.
We need to acknowledge both his brilliance and his flaws, his contributions and his transgressions. Only then can we truly understand his legacy and its relevance to our own time.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are not immune to the temptations of power and the complexities of human nature.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach history with a critical eye.
Right.
To question our assumptions and to be open to the possibility that there's always more to the story than we might initially think.
It's a great point. But speaking of hidden stories,
Yeah.
we haven't quite finished unpacking this whole papermark mystery.
Right.
What are some of the specific interpretations that the book provides for these symbols?
They delve into a whole range of fascinating symbols.
Okay.
Candlesticks, for example, are often interpreted as representing the illumination of knowledge, the dispelling of ignorance, the very act of bringing light into the darkness.
That ties in nicely with Bacon's emphasis on moving away from blind acceptance and towards a more enlightened understanding of the world.
Exactly. And they discuss the symbolism of grapes, often associated with the fruits of knowledge or the bounty of nature.
Right.
They analyze the significance of shields, which could represent protection nobility or the defense of truth.
It's amazing to think that these seemingly mundane objects could have carried such profound meanings for Bacon and his followers.
And it makes you wonder if there are other hidden messages embedded in the everyday objects and symbols that surround us, waiting to be decoded.
That's a thought-provoking idea, but before we go on a scavenger hunt for secret symbols, let's bring this back to the bigger picture.
Okay.
The book ends by asking if Bacon's ideas about knowledge and secrecy are still relevant today.
It's a fascinating question,
Yeah.
and one that we should definitely explore further.
Okay.
After all, we live in a world where information is more accessible than ever before,
Right.
but also where misinformation and manipulation run rampant.
So are you saying that Bacon's methods for seeking knowledge and discerning truth could actually be helpful in navigating today's digital landscape?
Yeah, it's almost like we've stumbled onto a secret society ourselves with all this talk of hidden knowledge and coded messages.
Right.
But you're right, that question about the relevance of Bacon's ideas today is really intriguing.
It is, because here we are, centuries later in the age of information overload.
Right.
We have access to more knowledge than ever before, but it's also easier to get lost in the noise,
Yeah.
to be misled by misinformation, to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it all.
So are you saying that Bacon's methods for seeking knowledge and discerning truth could actually be helpful in navigating today's digital landscape?
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
He emphasized the importance of critical thinking, of questioning assumptions, of testing ideas through observation and experimentation.
Okay.
Those principles are just as relevant today as they were in his time, maybe even more so. I see what you mean. It's easy to just accept what we see online at face value,
Right.
to get swept up in trends and echo chambers.
Yeah.
But Bacon would probably urge us to be more discerning,
Absolutely.
to dig deeper, to verify information before we embrace it.
Exactly. He was all about looking beyond the surface,
Okay.
about seeking the underlying causes and principles behind things.
Right.
And that's a valuable skill in a world where information is often presented in a fragmented, decontextualized way.
It's like we need to apply a Baconian filter to our online interactions.
I love that.
Yeah.
Baconian filter.
To be more critical consumers of information.
I know.
But what about the secret knowledge aspect?
Right.
Is there a place for that in our modern world?
Well, it depends on how you interpret secret knowledge.
Okay.
If we're talking about hoarding information, about keeping knowledge exclusive to a select few, then that goes against the principles of open access and collaboration that drive scientific progress today.
Right. Knowledge should be shared, not hidden away.
However, there's also an argument to be made for protecting certain types of knowledge, especially in sensitive fields like medicine or technology, to prevent misuse or unintended consequences.
Right.
It's a delicate balance between transparency and safeguarding knowledge for the greater good.
That's a really interesting point. It's like we need to be mindful of the potential impact of knowledge,
Yes.
to consider the ethical implications alongside the scientific advancements.
Precisely. And that's a conversation that's more important now than ever before.
Right.
As technology rapidly evolves, we need to grapple with the implications of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and other fields that have the power to reshape our world.
So while we may not need to resort to coded messages and secret societies,
Right.
Bacon's emphasis on using knowledge wisely, on being aware of its potential for both good and harm, is a message that resonates deeply in our current age.
Absolutely. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive.
Okay.
It's not just about the fascinating historical details, the tantalizing mysteries, or the captivating theories.
Right.
It's about how we engage with knowledge, how we seek it,
Yeah.
how we evaluate it, and ultimately how we use it to shape the world around us.
It's a reminder that knowledge is power, but it's also a responsibility.
A huge responsibility.
And as we navigate the complexities of the digital age, maybe a little bit of Baconian wisdom can help us find our way.
It's certainly worth pondering. So as you continue your own explorations,
Yeah.
keep those principles of critical thinking and ethical awareness in mind.
Okay.
Who knows what hidden meanings and valuable insights you might uncover.
Great advice. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those minds curious.